thank God it's Monday once again. I am Bambi SPD2 and I'm one of your hosts for tonight. Welcome to Leadership in the New World of Work. Tonight is our part 4 of the 5-part series on the topic of leadership.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Clarice Cabanlit, and I will be joining Bambi for tonight's event.
Last week, we were fortunate to have Master Certified Coach Jedi with us who talk about coaching approach in this new generation and new economy. It was an enlightening session for us, and I know our audience will agree that in these difficult times, we have to see beyond and do beyond. So that means that the paradigm shift should be the starting point. And Clarice, we want to know that one word or one phrase that you guys have learned or remembered from Master Certified Coach Jedi session. Please share, and why don't you type your answer in the chat box?
Okay, Bambi, while they're typing their answers, let me share mine. What really struck me from last week's session was really conversational mastery. It's really about coaching being a tool or an approach that we can help people have transformation in their lives. Okay, Bambi, what did they type?
Oh, every conversation is a gift. And there's Liam, okay? What else do we got here? Yeah, Liam.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what they really remembered. Mastery. Okay.
Nice. Coaching is loving people.
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
Yes. It's really about the heart, right?
Conversation mastery. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All
So
right.
it's really good to know.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you. Indeed, it was really powerful how Coach Jedi encouraged us to apply the principles of coaching to improve our relationships with the people in our homes and even in our workplaces. It's really exciting to do coaching. So anyway, we're going to talk about neuroscience and how it applies to leadership. Hence, our outfits tonight. Bambi, you look like you're on your way to a class in Harvard. Am I right?
I was really thinking, Clarice, that you're from Oxford University. You look very scholarly tonight.
Yeah, kahit sa outfit lang, no, we want to look scholarly tonight. So since
achieve yung geek.
no? Yes, you want to be nerdy, Anyway, since neuroscience is about how the brain works, you want to do a survey, okay? So everyone, try to visualize what your brain looks like tonight. So given your day, it's a Monday, what do you think does your brain look like? So here are the options. So you have several options there. Pick the option that best represents what you visualize. And then in a little bit, we're going to launch our poll. Oh, ayan, sumasagot na sila sa chat box.
But I'm happy to know that parang ang daming winning brain. Yeah, okay, happy brain. Curious brain, okay, loving brain.
Ayan,
here's the poll.
There. Yes, you can let us know by picking an answer in the poll. All right, let's see. We'll share the results in a little bit. We'll just give others some time to pick their answers.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, interesting how everyone...
It looks like everyone wants to be a winner here.
Yes. Okay, let's give them time to answer. Answers are still coming in, but it looks like winning brain and happy brain are leading.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yes, and then there's overwhelmed brain. Okay. Probably because it's a Monday.
Mm-hmm.
All right, just a few more, and then we will end the poll and share the results. Okay, here we go. Now okay, so you can see the results. All right,
winning brain.
Yes, winning brain, 37%. The top brain that was chosen from our poll. Yes, indeed, we want to win in life every single day. Okay, so that was just happy Bambi seeing all the results. Speaking of happy, Bambi, I know you have something to tell them about positive emotions.
Yes, Clarice, indeed. Positive emotions are good for storing empowering lessons in the long-term memory. So one more time, guys, let's have another brain exercise. Can you recall one activity that you did this week that gave you positive emotions? You can type your answers in the chat box.
Me, Bambi, I really felt so happy when I ate 2 cups of ice cream, chocolate ice cream. What
I'm a
about
chocoholic.
you?
I'm a chocoholic, so I'm happy when I eat chocolates.
Oh, okay. What about you guys? Let us know. Somebody said exercise.
Exercise. Wow, ang galing, no? Exercise. I want to do that.
I wish I could say that.
My plantita or plantito, talk to my plants, meditation. Okay, going fast. What
Food
else do
trip.
we have?
Somebody said food trip. And somebody said eating ramen. Yay. Somebody likes ramen
Dancing.
also.
Okay, walk with my dog.
Reading
Good night sleep.
scripture.
Giving back to the flood victim. Oh, that's nice. Sleeping long hours. Baking. Coffee. Okay.
Coffee. A lot of
Daily
coffee
devotion.
Answers.
Vacation. Quiet time. Swimming.
Swimming with lots of food.
Yeah.
Swimming will not be complete unless there's lots
Encourage
of
someone. Oh, that's sweet. Quiet time. Okay. Chit chat with siblings. Okay. Power punch. Time with my dogs and cats.
Yes.
Quality time with my loved ones. Okay.
Yes, really nice. Really nice. Thank you everyone for sharing.
Okay. So by the way, please continue to post about our event. But don't forget to add hashtags, the People's Academy, hashtag Future Fit Leaders, so you have the chance to win the free coaching session.
So go ahead, guys. Keep on posting. And anyway, tonight is very exciting because we're going to learn about how to engage and motivate people the neuroscience way, okay? Our speaker will introduce concepts and strategies that are backed by solid research. So he's not just reading this from books or learning this from other people. He's actually studying it. You can see how excited I am tonight, Bambi. Nabubulol na ako. So, but before we get to our speaker, Bambi, you'd like to acknowledge our partners?
Thanks, Clarice. And once again, we'd like to acknowledge the companies and organizations that have made this event possible. Thank you to Coaching Changes Lives, BrainX, Success Options, CoachCom, Asian Events, the Global Coach Academy, and PMAP CDO chapter.
And we've also partnered with Goal Speecher for their Change Makers project. By joining us, you are also supporting their initiative for out-of-school youth. And of course, the main organizer of this event is the People's Academy. Bambi, you just want to tell them more about the exciting things that we have in store for them in the coming months.
Yes, we want to remind you that registration for Mastery in Coaching is now open, and as mentioned last week, we have discount voucher for the first 20 approved registrants.
Ooh, discount vouchers. Go ahead, guys. Start registering for it. So anyway, I've been saying that I'm super excited, like really, really excited about our session tonight. And it's because I really am. Our speaker is really close to our hearts because he is our mentor and he's also our coach. Plus, he'll be talking about a very interesting topic. So get yourselves ready because he will share with us ideas that will really blow our minds. But before that, just a few reminders. You are muted at all times, but please type in your comments and your questions, especially during the Q&A later in the chat box. And for your viewing options, please choose side by side speaker. So that's done. And so Bambi, why don't you introduce our speaker tonight?
Thank you, Clarice. So tonight on the part 4 of our leadership series, our speaker is a versatile, young and dynamic self-made individual. Friends, brace yourselves as we bring out your inner geek tonight because we're going to give you a highly cerebral session. Guys, please watch the video. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to introduce our very own Rob Rances.
All right. So thank you so much, Bambi, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you guys for the excitement prior to me doing my presentation. Are you all excited right now? If you're excited, I want you to type one on the chat box. I want to see how many people are excited in the room right now. Okay. Wow. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. I see that. Thank you so much. I know everybody's excited right now because we're going to talk about a very important topic. Okay. So are you guys ready? Are you guys ready? All right, that's good. It's good that you guys are already ready and you're set for this. But before I begin, let me just remind you that there are actually two types of learners in leadership programs. All right, the first type of learners are actually those who possess the growth mindset. These are people who are in a leadership program to learn ways to really improve their leadership. And there are also others, hopefully we don't have them in this program, those who have a fixed mindset. They come to a program seeking validation for the leadership practices that they prefer. So hopefully we don't have them because it's hard to learn that way because, sometimes you just want to look for, ways to get validated. And when something that is presented is not really, aligned with what you believe in about leadership, then you actually oppose it, right? So, and I've seen that in a lot of classes when they come to a leadership program, they only take in what they think is aligning with their leadership practices. All right. So I hope you guys actually put on a growth mindset tonight because it's very important. While it is true that leadership actually should be based on timeless principles, but these timeless principles should also be applied in a very relevant way. All right. And I don't know what your case is in your business, but one thing for sure that the business landscape today has already changed, right? So much has already changed. For example, there has been a lot of notable shifts in organizations. For example, before what used to work was hierarchical type of leadership, but today we see distributed types of leadership, all right? Where it is more of a flatter structure. And that by itself would also demand different leadership skills and behaviors. Before, there used to be jobs. There are still jobs right now, but slowly we're beginning to see jobs being replaced by tasks. When before people are just paid for the hours that they spend at work, but now you may not be working for a company, but you're only working with a company, basically, as a partner by delivering some tasks, right? Before as well, you used to see CEOs who would be wearing suits, right? But today, some CEOs, in fact, best CEOs are not wearing suits, they're just wearing hoodies. Before, if you want to work, you have to go to a building that you call your workplace. But today, you can work in your homes. In fact, you can already work anywhere. So there are a lot of notable shifts in organizations today, and that would also demand a different kind of leadership. So perhaps I'm thinking that the best way to actually start this presentation is for us to do a little bit of assessment of our own leadership behaviors, all right? So what I want you to do right now is I want you to take out your pen and paper and be ready to also take a screenshot right now. And I want you to rate yourself from 1 to 5. I will be presenting some leadership behaviors, all right? And let's see how often are you using these leadership behaviors in your practice, okay? At work or in business. So 1 for never, and perhaps 5 for often or always. All right. So you've got to exercise your judgment for 2, 3, 4 eventually. So it's just an estimate, an assessment of your leadership behavior. So I'll bring out some leadership behaviors right now, and I want you to score yourself from 1 to 5 in each of the behaviors. Are you ready? All right. So, all right, let me bring out the behaviors. Okay, behavior number 1 for leadership: approach situations in a customer-centric manner. Score yourself from 1 to 5, never or always. 1 for never and 5 is always. Number 2, create a clear vision. All right. 3, act as a role model and set an example. 4, take risks and go beyond the status quo. 5, lead change and actively evangelize it or promote it. 6, regard performance as the ultimate objective. 7, see everything through the lens of profitability. And 8, demonstrate ethics and integrity. And by the way, the context here is business leadership. So whatever your scores are in those individual behaviors, I want you to add them up, all right? And total. Are you done with the total? Let's go to the next set. Number 9, this is the next set. Rely on hierarchy to make decisions. So I'm sure, guys, you're familiar with hierarchy, right? There's a CEO and vice presidents and all of them, enablers, and of course, people who work in the field in the front lines. Number 10, ask permission from superiors. 11, take a one-size-fits-all approach to manage all groups and situations. 12, create rigid, multi-layer strategic plans and stick to them. 13, make the final decision and expect adherence. 14, recommend following accepted protocols. 15, only pass essential information down to team members. And 16, micromanage the work of each member of the team. Tally your scores, add them up, and see what your total is for this set. All right, so let's go to the next. The next, number 17, feel intrinsically driven by a strong purpose, meaning your motivation is coming from within. Number 18, base decision on data and analytics. 19, feel comfortable working across boundaries within and outside your organization, meaning you collaborate with others even outside of your organization. Number 20, behave authentically in thoughts and communication. You bring your authentic self. 21, demonstrate empathy in all interactions. 22, believe in and actively promote inclusivity. There's no exclusiveness. You want to include everybody. 23, nurture the passion of team members. That's called individualized consideration. Number 24, show humility in all interactions. So review your scores for this set and then total them. All right. So what I'd like you to do right now is that I want you to identify which set is your highest and which set is your lowest. All right. So we have sets A, that is 1 to number 8. Set B is actually 9 to number 16. And set C is 17 to 24. Which one is your highest set and lowest set? A, B, or C? I want you to write them down in the chat box so I would know where we are in terms of our leadership style. All right, I'm seeing that right now. I'm seeing that in the monitor right now. Thank you so much for that. All right, so those are actually some sets, and there was a study at MIT, and in the study, they actually surveyed from a lot of leaders from different levels and different sectors and industries, and they found out that there are several leadership behaviors, all right, that are helpful in the new work in the new world of work right now, and there are also others that might be irrelevant already. Okay, so they've categorized them, and in fact, I've presented them to you in categories. So the first, and it comes out like this, all right, what you should know about your leadership behaviors. Items number 1 and 8 are actually the enduring leadership behaviors. In other words, these are leadership behaviors that you should not be compromising. They should be in place. They are timeless. They have to be intact. All right. Whatever the age is, they're important. They're foundational in leadership. However, number 9 and 16 behaviors are actually eroding leadership behaviors. In other words, and there are a lot of reasons why they are eroding leadership behaviors. Perhaps because they're no longer relevant to the new marketplace, or perhaps because, the people do not prefer those leadership behaviors anymore. Lastly, items number 17 to 24 are emerging leadership behaviors. These are new behaviors, perhaps. A lot of you actually said you're high in number C. Good for that. Maybe we actually have an audience of mostly millennials, and maybe you are very proactive in terms of upgrading your leadership behavior as well. So did you get an idea of how your leadership actually works? I'm not saying that B or category B behaviors are actually wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say right now. It's just that among leaders in most industries and organizations, that is already an eroding leadership behavior because they find it irrelevant to the new world of work. So how relevant is that right now in terms of our presentation tonight? All right. Now, the reason why leadership changes, all right, a lot of us apparently are, in terms of leadership, our understanding of leadership is focused more on leadership being a personality or being a trait. But leadership is more than that. Leadership is also responsibility. It also includes skills. And there are a lot of things that are changing around the subject of leadership. One of them, and the reason why we need to upgrade our leadership, is because the business landscape is changing. A lot of things have been changing in society, in politics, in environment, in all areas, right? And in fact, organizations today are faced with wicked problems. And what are wicked problems? These are not ordinary challenges. These are problems that are interconnected with one another, problems that are difficult to identify. These are problems that never get completely solved at all. Solutions can't be tested without first implementing it. And it will also take a lot of time before you would know exactly whether the solutions are working. All right. And every problem is actually unique. It may look the same in form, but the approach in which you would solve them would be totally different. All right. And these are also problems. They're called wicked problems because it involves a lot of stakeholders with different conflicting ideas and interests. And oftentimes, this is where you need to practice leadership so that it actually balances all the interests, balances the benefits for the interest of everyone involved or all the stakeholders. They are interconnected. Solution may cause new problems as well. And there's no end to the timeline in terms of how you can solve these problems. All right. COVID is actually an example of a wicked problem. There are minor versions of them actually in the workplace as well. All right. Aside from the wicked problems that our organizations are facing or teams are facing today, to be able to be, for you to be competitive in business, all right, there are already competitive norms. It's not business as usual anymore. Number one, there's unrelenting change, and that is caused by the environment, that is caused by a lot of other factors. But, the digital revolution is actually causing unrelenting change. For once, one might work, and then after 6 months, it won't work anymore, right? So there seems to be an exponential change in business, that it's going at an exponential rate. And so also hyper competition, which means that competition is not just coming from the same industry or the same field, it could be coming from somewhere else. For example, in the next few years, we will be experiencing what we call autonomous cars, which means that cars won't need drivers to be driving them physically, right? But do you know that's going to affect eventually the insurance industry, because the biggest revenue of the insurance industry is actually coming from accident insurances, right? And it might also affect the energy drink industry, because the biggest number of people who are consuming energy drinks are actually drivers. Thirdly, another competitive norm that you can consider in the marketplace is actually knowledge consideration, where old expertise will not be enough anymore to solve the problems in the present. So nobody has a monopoly of all the answers to be able to move forward in this time and age. That is why leadership has to change. And that is also why organizations had to change in terms of structure, from hierarchy to hierarchy, where everything is now connected beyond the walls of buildings, beyond the walls of the usual organizational charts, right? And people are no longer just working for companies. Now they are working with companies. And that also demands a different kind of leadership, where you need to balance not only top-down approach to leadership, where decisions are made from the top and everybody's expected to just follow, but this time around, you need to have consideration of bottom-up approach to be able to maximize the expertise and the experience of the people in the field, because that's how exactly you can identify the problems to solve and to move your entire organization forward. So in other words, both values are coming from the top as well as from the bottom, and that demands a different kind of leadership. So with that said, there are four critical competencies that leaders must develop in their people. All right. Number one is actually performance, which is a mainstay in business. Number two is collaboration, where people get to work with one another at a higher level. Number three is innovation. And number four is agility. And by the way, these are not leadership competencies at the executive level. But what I'm trying to say is that these are competencies that anybody in the organization need to develop in themselves. Yes, they are leadership competencies, but today it only means to say that leadership is not just contained at the top of the organization. The call today is for leaders to raise other leaders. All right. That is now the call today, for leaders to develop other leaders, because everyone in the organization has to learn leadership. So there. Now, today's vital leadership tasks to be able to develop performance, collaboration, innovation, and agility in their people, there are two vital tasks for leaders. Vital because, when you say vital, that means life depends on it. So the two vital tasks of leaders in running their organization, number one, is to amplify the slices of genius in individual. We believe that every individual possesses a genius inside. Secondly, to be able to activate collaboration, innovation, and agility, the leader must be able to meld these many slices of genius together to create a collective genius that's not just coming from one brain, but the brains of many people in the organization. All right. So the leader must find a place for each individual in the organization, and also at the same time find a way to meld them together to create what you call collective leadership. Okay. So there. Now, when it comes to the competency of performance, it is not enough to just talk about performance and just demand outcome-based performance from people. Okay, what most studies have been providing us evidence with is actually performance can only be sustained with well-being. So pushing for outcome-based performance alone is no longer enough in organizations. It is also the responsibility of the leader to take care of the well-being of his people, all right, in order to boost performance. My point is simply this, all right? So you're not just going to measure the performance of people in terms of outputs, but as a leader, it's also your responsibility that people are experiencing high well-being in the organization. So in this matrix, it seems to show from many studies that when organizations or leaders are taking care of the well-being of their people, there seems to be higher levels of engagement as well. And you know, engagement is very costly in organizations because employees who are not engaged are costing the organization a lot of money, right? So of course, we don't want the left side of this matrix where we can only have happy people who are non-workers in your business or distressed people and dysfunctional. What is common in most organizations, however, is that either people are they are functional, but they are distressed. They're working, they're delivering, but they are distressed. But what is ideal is for people to be, so that it would be sustainable, is for people to be happy and at the same time high performance. And that only happens when there is a balance between well-being and performance. All right. So it's not enough to think about performance in terms of outcomes, but start to think about performance or redefine performance as the balance between well-being and productivity. Okay. So how important is that? That is, well-being is very important because it actually affects how the brain works. Okay. In this model, we can see that when the brain, when you don't have enough focus on well-being and people are distressed, eventually what gets activated in their brain is their amygdala. Amygdala is the fear center of the brain, and that generates the fear in people. That is also where most anxiety and depression are usually generated from. Now, what is crucial about this is that when people are distressed because there's no well-being in the organization, is that the blood flow is actually hijacked. Supposedly, the information will be processed in the prefrontal cortex, which is your smart brain. That is the intelligent part of the brain. That is where you get that is where people are willing to work with one another. People activate their creativity and their imagination and their innovation. But you're not able to tap into that without well-being because people end up distressed. And when people end up distressed, the blood will no longer flow to the cortical regions of the brain, which means that it will basically, stifle creativity, proper decision-making, and the rest of the decision-making will be based on fear. And can you imagine if you have leaders and people in your organization whose decision-making are based on fear, your organization is not going to end anywhere, right? Now, what well-being can do is that even if there is high amount of performance that is required and yet it's balanced with well-being, you still facilitate the flow of the information and the way they process it in the brain towards the cortical regions of the brain, which is the smart brain, which is the CEO brain, which is the creative brain, and which is where creativity and innovation and collaboration and agility are actually generated. And by the way, that may also be rooted on our idea about intelligence, because for the longest time we think that intelligence is our ability to accumulate knowledge, but that is not what intelligence is all about. According to neuroscience, the closest definition for intelligence is behavioral flexibility, the ability of people to use their knowledge, their experiences, and their memory to be able to come up with the right decisions at the moment when flexibility is needed. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that is the function of your cortical regions. But if your cortical regions are already hijacked because of this stress, then it's almost impossible for people to tap into their genius, and even more impossible for you to meld the geniuses of people together to create what we call the collective genius. Do you get that? So, in other words, when people are distressed, their way of thinking usually flows through the low road. And the low road would disable the higher cortex, which is responsible for your smart decisions. And it's well-being that allows people to actually start to process information at a higher road through their higher cortex. Do you get that? That is how important well-being is. So that's about it generally for how to amplify the genius in individual. Everyone has a genius. It's just a matter for the leader to create that environment in which that genius could actually flourish. Now, for the second part, which is the collective part, melding these slices of genius into a collective genius through collaboration, innovation, and agility. is still connected with the first one that I discussed, called collective genius. Yes. However, the prerequisite for collaboration, innovation, and agility is what we call psychological safety. Now, a lot of people think that the main role of the leader is to become a hero to everybody, but that is not the main role of the leader. If you look at it from an anthropological perspective, go back to history, people actually congregate around a personality that they feel more safe with. And that is how we actually survive through the challenges of the times, right? Because there's someone who stands as a leader, all right, and that someone provides that sense of safety for the people. That is the primary role of every leader. So, what is psychological safety? It's actually coined by Harvard professor Amy Edmonton, okay, but also another similar study called the Aristotle Project. Google wanted to figure out what exactly is the most important factor to building a successful team. And after several years of study within Google, they found out that the most important factor is actually creating psychological safety. All right. So this is where more people are more likely to own up their own mistakes. All right. Because they know they don't get punished for their mistakes, but perhaps they would get a corrective feedback for that, but they don't get punished at all. Better partners to their, they also become better partners to their colleagues. They have less likely to leave the organization, more likely to be open to diverse ideas, feeling they could be their true selves around the leader, more likely to tap into their strengths, comfortable expressing their thoughts about the work at hand. Psychological safety is the foundation of what melds people's brains together into a collective genius. Linda Hill, also professor at Harvard Business School, said that great leaders must see their role primarily as creators of a context in which others are willing and able to make innovation happen. Get that? Another, Sally Spinks, also said, ultimately, it requires a company's leadership to make a bold commitment and set up the right conditions for creativity to thrive. In other words, hero leadership is far gone, all right? It's almost an eroding trait already. What leaders need to be are supposed to be leaders who are transformational, leaders who are servant leaders, leaders who are advocating humility in the organization, because it's as if they hold the entire organization together in their hands to lift them up. These are leaders who allow people to step on their shoulders so that people can begin to see, heights that are impossible for themselves to see without the leader. All right. So that is the new concept of leadership now. Now, the impact of leadership is very important because the leader can directly influence subordinates' sense of safety. And when subordinate sense of safety is lost, they immediately get into a stress response in their brain. And the stress response, when it becomes chronic, actually hijacks your prefrontal cortex. And that is where they lose their sharpness in terms of their performance. Subordinates' level of trusts, engagement, affinity, and motivation in the context of organization are also linked to the leader's behavior. All right. So for most of us, perhaps when we look at, subordinates under us, we think that, it's, yes, there are innate behaviors in them, but also the leader has the capacity to influence them. A leader can also intentionally set up the right conditions for collective genius to thrive in organizations. Now, there's a particular framework that a neuroscientist, his name is his name is Dr. David. I kind of forgot what his family name was, but basically he was saying that the brain keeps on scanning for threats around. You know how much and how often? 5 times every second. To get that, 5 times every second, your brain is always scanning for threats. So within the marketplace, all right, the degree in which people would want to connect with the leader, would want to engage with the leader, or would want to, in which people are actually motivated to work with the leader, will all depend on SCARF: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So when these things are actually compromised, it activates the stress response in the brain, and that will also influence the responses of people towards the leader, whether they move away from the leader or they move toward the leader or with the leader. So that is very critical, right? So here, and by the way, neuroscience is not psychology, because the neuroscience is, we actually look at the mechanisms, actual mechanisms of the brain for particular situations. That's how we experiment about it. And David Rock, David Rock, the founder of Neuro Leadership Institute, actually coined SCARF as a framework in which the brain keeps on scanning within the workplace. So one is status. It is the brain's need to know our relative importance to others. So when we feel that our relative importance to others is threatened, it activates a stress response in the brain so that people start to panic. Do you get that? For example, in the workplace, when people are not invited to key meetings and they start to think that their opinion do not matter to the organization anymore, that activates that stress response. And immediately it will affect the motivation and the engagement of the person in the context of the team or the organization. All right. So, for example, they have ideas or projects and they're kept on hold all the time. They will start to think that their job is unimportant to the leader or to the organization. Okay. Another one is certainty. This is the brain's need to predict the future, because our brains are so wired towards survival. And that's the reason why we still live up to this day. All right. That is how, I don't know, maybe our fallen brains are also wired that we just want to survive, and we're finding ways to survive all the time. All right. Within the workplace. And that could be, for example, when the leader becomes very silent about not certain issues, but certain directions that may affect them, and they start to feel uncertain within the workplace, that will start to activate the threat response in the brain, which will also affect the motivation of people. Example as well, the situation right now where people get to work at home, right? And there are also a lot of challenges to that. And people start to think, I wonder how long I will be working from home, right? And so many things are so in flux, and nobody has an idea who to count on, because it seems like there's no credible solution at all around to actually hang on to and to make this and to base your decisions on. Autonomy is also another factor. When this is compromised, it will again create a stress response in the brain. This is the brain's need for a sense of control and have choices. So when autonomy is compromised, this can cause a person, this can actually activate the amygdala, right? When people are bombarded with never-ending series of Zoom meetings, okay, and there seems to be a need to respond to every message. And perhaps you have a boss who's micromanaging everything that you do. That compromises the sense of control, the sense of autonomy, and people end up with no choice. And you are so surprised why people are not measuring up in terms of performance when you are actually micromanaging. And the simple explanation is that the information doesn't get to travel to the cortical regions of the brain. That is why the person doesn't have a sense of initiative or a sense of creativity towards a certain problem, and the person ends up with doing the same problem all over again. What else? Relatedness. This is the brain's need for safety via being with other people. So, for example, for a lot of people, anxiety has been triggered because of social distancing. And for some people, they find this very lonely. And of course, they miss their friends. It compromises their sense of relatedness to other people. You get that? Now, for example, as simple as getting a person excluded from an existing chat room, for example, can actually not just offend somebody, but also cause that stress response in the brain. And for no reason, that person gets offended, because eventually it's the amygdala that's more hyperactive than the one that can actually make sense of the situation. All right. What else? Lastly would be fairness. That's just the brain's need for a fair exchange. So, for example, when an employee would say, I don't understand how or why this decision was made, or perhaps with regards to rewards and incentives, and there seems to be no exact rule or guidelines as to how it has been awarded and people start to question about the fairness of the rewards and the incentives, that can cause a stress response as well and affect their motivation. Policies that are not equally applied to everybody, or relationships that are not equally applied to everybody, also activates that stress response in the brain, which will hijack eventually at the chronic level, will hijack, the processing of hijack the thought process at the cortical level. All right. So my point here, before I would end, because I'd like you to ask more questions, because that is how we could learn more. The point here is that there is a need in organizations to have brain-friendly culture, starting with the leaders to become brain-friendly themselves. As science provides sufficient evidence that fear suppresses the genius in people, love will be the only unshakable rock upon which organization should be founded in order to fully unleash human potential. After all, there's a particular verse in the Bible that says, perfect love drives away fear. And from that, I think we can get some insights on how organizations and leadership should be built upon. That would be it. I'm open to your questions.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much. And Yes, I really want to say that I agree with Rob, no, in the People's Academy, yeah, where we both belong, we really have that psychological safety. So hindi tayo takot, and we can readily express, and we become very free. And thank you so much for that, Rob.
Yes. We want to honor you for that, for being a great leader who really motivates us to, by amplifying our genius. And hearing all of those things, it felt like I took a semester's worth of course in one night. So thank you so much, Rob.
I was actually not to sound very scientific there. I tried to explain that as simple as I could, and I hope you guys understood the concepts basically.
Yes, I actually loved it.
Agree.
And I'm sure the participants also did. So we encourage everyone to type in your questions. While we're just talking a little bit about what Rob discussed, we want to see what you think about what he shared just tonight. And also, if you have questions, please type them in. So Rob, I really like the scarf. Diba? The scarf, ano yun? Ay, tawag doon. Letter A ang start on scarf.
Economy.
The SCAR framework.
Ganon. I really like it. Very easy to remember, but at the same time, very powerful.
Acronym.
Acronym, yes. Very powerful yung impact niya.
Acronym.
All right. Can I get started with the questions? Okay. So I'll ask the first questions. You said that well-being and performance have to go hand in hand. But if you're a leader, especially if you're in middle management, you're actually there answering to the top management to work on the bottom line, but you're also working with people who are doing the actual work in the field. So how do you balance that, especially when you have deadlines? How do you ensure that they're performing while at the same time you're taking care of their well-being?
Well, actually, it's always a balance between well-being and productivity. So productivity should be well spelled in terms of what expected from the people. And with regards to well-being, following the SCARF could also help. But as a leader, it is very important that you create that climate in which people can optimize their sense of well-being. So for example, a lot of people think that multitasking is actually the key to solving a lot of problems and getting a lot of tasks done. But from a neuroscientific point of view, multitasking is actually non-existent. It is a myth. It's not true, because the brain can never multitask. The brain can only multi-pace. The brain can attend from one job to another or one task to another, but it cannot multitask in a sense that it cannot do a lot of tasks altogether. And if you force the brain to do that, what actually happens is that it activates that stress response in the brain, and it stifles, smart thinking.
Yeah, so it really just finding that balance, even if there's so much pressure from inside and from outside. Family, I think we have some questions. Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Yeah.
You want to add?
that as well. Let me add to that. What actually it's also wrong to think that for people to be able to help people develop resilience is that you take away a lot of tasks from them because they might not be able to grow if they're not able to attend to challenging tasks. However, if you're a leader and you're giving somebody a challenging task, you need to balance that with the availability of resources to help them accomplish the task. So if you're the type of leader who eventually presents a task and gives deadlines, and yet there are not resources available for people to help them accomplish the task, that's unfair. Get that? You can only get people more distressed by doing that. And you need to have, so in other words, leadership is about, yes, getting people to accomplish a task, but also making sure that you're helping out people navigate the task well by giving them enough resources to accomplish it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So resources is also an important factor to consider if you want people to really perform well. Okay,
Yeah.
Bambi, I think we have questions.
Yeah,
in our
here's
chat.
another question. I was just curious about the last slide about love. How to show love to your organization without being abused by your substituents? How do you prove love even without compromising your own psychological safety? That's a nice question.
Well, if everybody understands what psychological safety is, and I guess if you spell that out very, very well, everybody understands it because, it's not love as if you have all the freedom in the world, right? To do whatever you can. After all, you're being loved. If you understand the concept of psychological safety, it is actually a concept of taking care of one another, making sure that you're nice to everybody. And that also includes not being familiar with the leader, to get that, or abusing the leader. So perhaps this could be prevalent in organizations right now because there's no understanding about psychological safety. There's also no common understanding about how to establish your leadership style and the context for your organization or your team that is based on love, right? So it's really, I think the problem really is lies actually in proper communication and putting all the boundaries and the rail guards around certain concepts when you're implementing it in an organization.
Okay, so it's really about setting the foundations. Yeah. So Rob, if we were to, we're used to the eroding skills, using those skills in leading. How do you think can a leader get started if they want to provide well-being and at the same time help their employees with performance?
I think the easiest way to do that is to change the way they communicate with one another. The closest to brain-based or brain-friendly conversation is actually coaching, because coaching is when you exercise a lot of empathy to make sure that you are not doing things to be understood, but first to understand, right? Because that's a goal of every coach, and that's a goal of every coaching conversation, that you are there to seek to understand before you want to seek to be understood. So I think that would neutralize a lot of problems in organizations if only people know how to do masterful conversations the coaching way. That would be a great start.
Coaching mastery.
Yes, which is what we learned last week.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question. In the new normal setup, how does leadership change from the old views to the current situation? And how do we assess leadership in the new normal setup?
All right. How to assess leadership in the new normal? It's different for everybody. If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? If it's still working, then let it work and then do some iterations little by little until and that's part of change management, right? You're not going to be there to say, what you're doing is wrong, but actually to properly navigate brick after brick. And that is best way of managing change in organizations. But I tell you, if you're in the middle management, that will be a bit of a challenge. That is why in our case, we work with executive level leaders, because they are the ones who have direct influence on the culture of the organization. It can be a bit of a challenge when you're at the middle management and you would want to, create transformation in your organization, and yet you don't have the approval of the executive level, decision makers in your organization. But nevertheless, that wouldn't stop you from being a nicer person to somebody else.
Yeah, I like that. Being a nicer person. It sounds so simple, but it can go a long, long way.
And it's difficult.
Yeah, yeah. So Rob, there's a question. In a sales organization, what is the right balance of following a proven system versus welcoming new ideas?
Oh, I'd like that. All right. Yes. For example, in a sales organization, it's important to have a proven system altogether. And in fact, that is how you measure how things are done, because it's very outcome based in a sales organization. However, that shouldn't stop you from doing the right way of communicating with one another, right? Because in a sales organization, oftentimes there's no balance between consideration for the needs of other people, because oftentimes we are all after, the leader is perhaps after an outcome, and you are also after people delivering an outcome for themselves, right? But then again, the simplest way that you can start is actually change the way you communicate with somebody else.
Hmm.
For
It
example,
always goes back to communication.
it goes back to communication. If you want a very simple step to begin with, right? So for example, in terms of the usual goal setting, where you're just focused on the outcomes and you don't think about the welfare of the other person, this is where you bring in well-being principles in the conversation. You do coaching approach to goal setting instead. And for example, when you're doing an assessment or evaluation at the end of the week, for example, you can do coaching approach instead of the usual approach of trying to intimidate people so that they start to measure up the following week. That doesn't work anymore, right? So do coaching approach, be nice, be a humble leader, and I think that will make a lot of difference.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Being nice, be a wonderful leader. Yeah.
So here's another question, Rob. Shall I close down my business and dismiss all employees, or shall I dismiss the few in order to save the many, and why? Thank you, and God bless the People's Academy.
Wow. Oh, well, definitely I cannot give you any advice moving forward because I don't know the context of your business. One sentence cannot explain fully what's happening inside the business. All right. But you're the leader here. It's your call. And perhaps if we have a chance, let's say you are part of the next mastery in coaching and you bring that as a case, then maybe we can talk about it.
Yes. Okay. One more question. For fully work from home teams, what do you think would be a good amount of checkpoint meetings? We currently have 4 times a week voice calls, 15 minutes, and then just one Zoom meeting to kick off the week.
If it's working for you, then you must be doing it the right way. But if you feel you're feeling distressed because of all of them, then there might be a need to reevaluate that. So I cannot really tell when it's specific situation because I don't know the context, as I said.
Yeah. Okay.
Rob, I just wanna add a little, ask something in relation to Zoom meetings. So let's say you're having Zoom meetings and people just meet through Zoom. How do you build relatedness so that they don't think that Zoom meetings are just for things in the agenda and then they don't get to relate about other things? You know, like you meet each other in the pantry, you talk about something else other than what's on the meeting.
Well, I think Zoom actually came out as part of people's trying to survive in the context of relatedness, right? So it's better. I mean, Zoom is better than nothing at all.
Yeah.
Yes. The challenge there is how to actually improve the relatedness score while you're doing Zoom. And of course, there will always be limitations to that. There are studies in neuroscience, and part of this, part of the benefit of face-to-face communication is actually what we call the mirror network, where there seems to be a click because, the same regions that are active in the one who's transmitting the message eventually will be reflected in the brain of the other person receiving it. Apparently, that doesn't work in online meetings. All right. in online meetings. So I don't know if that has any correlation with relatedness at all.
Okay. So again, re-evaluating what works and what doesn't work for a specific team.
Okay. So Robert, here's
I think what's important, sorry, let me add. I think what's important is really to have consideration for other people. And not only consideration, but individualized consideration. When it comes to leadership, do not make decisions based on assumption. Because the best way is to be humble, approach the person, and ask about it to find the real score. That's it, right? Because leadership is a contact sport. It's not, leadership is not based on assumption. That's a very weak kind of leadership. Real leadership is when you touch the heart. Real leadership is when you're communicating with people. If there's something wrong, do not assume, ask the person. And if you have created that climate or psychological safety in the organization, then it should be easier for people to just open up and say, and a leader can just approach and say, I feel like there seems to be a disconnect between you and me. Is there something that you prefer about the leader that I might not be demonstrating? Because as a leader, I want to reach out to you. Or is there something that's offending to you with the way I've been treating you? Because if I could adjust, then I would. Because we're here for relationship. We're here to, move this forward together. It's difficult. If you want to be effective as a leader, it's really difficult because it takes a lot of humility to do that.
Yeah, humility. Rob, I just want to add on to the another question on humility. Let's say you're the type of leader for years you've been this autocratic. You just give you make decisions for your team. How do you get started towards becoming that kind of leader that actually listens and that actually cares for your people? Yeah, I think that's a question. I don't want to add to it.
Yes. Yeah, I got you there. This is not to promote the mastery in coaching, but coming before I got into coaching, I was actually I reached a certain level of leadership in sales, and I wasn't used to listening to people. I was used to setting goals and telling people, let's do this, and then motivating people to move towards the direction to create results and celebrate together, right? And for me, I think listening was the last that I developed as a leader, but I only developed that intentionally after I heard about coaching, because coaching, the hardest part of coaching is not the techniques in terms of asking questions, because you can definitely ask best questions without listening, right? But oftentimes, the gap in leadership or in communication is really all about listening. There's always a listening gap there. So that if you are able to close that gap by proper listening, then eventually I think it will solve a lot of problems.
Should be listen with all your heart, no? Yes. Talagang you put that effort and you really have to be very very attentive, active listening. Yeah. Okay, so here's another question, Rob. Neuroplasticity being a key in developing agility. Can you give some practical tips to improve that?
All right. Practical tips to improve neuroplasticity. Number one is exercise, because when you exercise, you actually you release more BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is key to neuroplasticity. You get that? That is why exercise is a magic pill for the brain. Do you know that the brain actually heals itself, provided that you give it the right environment, and exercise is one of them. Second, the brain, although it only occupies about 2% of your body mass, but it actually uses or consumes about 25% of your body's energy. So in other words, the brain is very efficient in terms of its use of energy. That is why you forget about things without you trying to forget it, because that is how the brain actually prunes some information or connections so that it will not use up a lot of energy. All right. And when it comes to how the brain uses metabolism to be able to use that energy, food is very important, because we're not like plants who can attract energy from the sun because we don't do photosynthesis, right? But the only way for us to replenish our energy is actually through food with the right nutrients. And believe me, there are actually foods that there are foods that can boost the brain. So for example, a lot of greens, nuts, good fats could actually boost the brain. And apparently, um, preservatives, a lot of sweets, and all of that can really damage your brain as well, or slow down your brain as well. So these are some practical things that you can do. Prayer is also very good for your brain. There are actually studies done with regards to spiritual activities, including prayer, that they get to facilitate healing inside the brain and better detoxification when you sleep at night. All right. So these things are like, they're wonderful. And a lot of these things, you don't really need to pay for, you don't need to spend a lot of money to be able to take care of your brain.
Okay, so exercise, healthy eating, sleep,
Church.
prayer.
Prayer.
Yes, these are very simple things that we actually do every day. We just have to be consistent. Okay.
That is why it's so tied up, I think, with lifestyle, because the brain is the CEO of your entire body, right? So it has to be tied up with lifestyle, because if the interventions to make your brain better are so, they're like alien interventions, then God must be wrong at designing it that way, right? He designed it in such a way that it's so tied up with what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah. So not hard at all. We actually can
That's
do,
hard. And
all of us can
free.
do it. Yeah,
And
free.
free.
Okay, one more question. One of the unfortunate realities of this pandemic is that many companies have been left with no choice but to retrench. Many have delayed this, but inevitably had to face this reality at the latter part of last year or even early this year. So the question is, how can we navigate employee engagement, morale, or providing an environment of certainty when we ourselves, even the board level, do not know or cannot promise that retrenchment cannot happen again?
Yeah, it's inevitable. Because there are a lot of factors why you retrench people. And I really admire those business people who are selling their properties just to hold the business together and to make sure that retrenchment doesn't happen. But it's inevitable because of the economic crisis, right? um it will be different for different people. The approach will be different for different people and for different businesses. It really depends on the case. So for this particular person who through this question, I could feel the sincerity of the question, and you can actually reach out to us, and perhaps we can go deeper in terms of talking about this matter.
Mm, okay, yeah, inevitable.
They also want to know if you can recommend books in which they can read about psychological safety.
There's actually an entire book on psychological safety. It's by Amy Edmonton. She's a professor at Harvard University, Harvard Business School. There are a lot of applied neuroscience books that's best for leaders and organizations out there. Um, However, in the Philippines, we're not w- we don't have it yet. It's like scarcity. I don't think there's anybody else who's actually practicing in a real sense applied neuroscience for organizations here in the Philippines, and I hope there are. Um, but it's just a matter of educating ourselves. There are a lot of books if you search through Amazon, and there are a lot of books available out there of neuroscience that's applicable for leadership in organizations.
Mhm.
And it's the closest, and I mean, the thing about neuroscience is it's not just based on psychology or hints. It's really based on how our brains are biologically wired, and that's how we study it. That's how we study how people respond. We study, and there are a lot of applications in terms of neuroscience for marketing, neuroscience for sales, neuroscience for parenting, neuroscience for this and that. But then again, the warning is that it's a lot of these studies are inconclusive as yet, because it's only been 15 years that neuroimaging technologies have been used to get into cases and subjects like this. So, yeah, I would say treat it like a scientist, that nothing is actually conclusive in science, right? A lot of people who are not trained in science would think that they treat science as, an absolute truth. But a real scientist would never treat science as an absolute truth because everything in science can be challenged. So when you read books like these, always think that there might be another perspective behind it.
Right. So yeah, try them out and then see what works for you and then tweak as necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As for
Okay.
me, actually, what actually works for me is that I think I've been grounded in terms of, in terms of my belief in terms of my belief, and grounded in terms of scripture. So,
Mhm.
well, it doesn't make sense to some scientists that I want that to be the foundation, the immovable rock for me, in which I would base things in. But, to keep your sanity and to be able to grow yourselves, you need to have a foundation in which you base
Mm.
things from, right? At least at the personal level. And for me, I always like evaluate it against the scripture, against the Bible. And if I think that, there's no conflict there, then I get to appreciate science more.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Rob, you mentioned earlier about amplifying individual geniuses and putting them together to create a collective genius. So, question is, how do we elicit or draw from the team their cohesive power?
Wow. Number one, again, I already mentioned psychological safety, right? So that's very important. That's very foundational when you're working with a team, basically. At BrainX, we actually have an entire course on performance, collaboration, innovation, and agility that's based on brain science. It's an online course that we actually run. And one of the best ways, I think, is for you to understand a little bit of neuroscience for teams and organizations. But when, uh, but that's pretty difficult to actually answer, because I will always go back to communication again. And there are different modes of communicating, and coaching, I think, is the closest way of communicating in which you empower people, because you're not, in a sense, invasive, intrusive, right? You are there 100% to first listen, and then eventually bring in the right perspective, but not solve it by yourself. You're the kind of leader who doesn't solve it by yourself. You're not the hero leader, but you allow people to actually look at the situation objectively and solve it by themselves. Now, innovation, when it comes to innovation as well, let me just add that a lot of people have misconception about innovation, that innovation is about, creativity, and that creativity is about arts. No, creativity has nothing to do with arts. Creativity is actually about problem solving. And innovation is when you put different perspectives from different disciplines. It's multidisciplinary. You want to listen to as many people as possible, different perspectives as possible. Because innovation is when you cross pollinate disparate ideas that don't seem to be coming together. All right. And this is how you put together what you call collective brain. You don't have to be in the same page together. A great leader will not neutralize someone just simply because that someone is bringing a different perspective to the conversation, right? Because a great leader would understand that innovation happens when you consider this, and out of ingenuity, you can altogether put that together to come up with a more innovative solution that's never been thought of by, and will never be thought of by, simply one individual. So listening is very important. I mean, like, and no wonder why God placed two ears, right? Two ears and one mouth,
Yeah.
because definitely listening is very important.
Yes. Yes.
We indeed have winning brains in the room, Clarice. There's a lot of questions. I have another DM here. Let me just read it, Rob. I am in the company which is very competitive and result-oriented. People in position are trained to leave the person when he or she doesn't follow or obey leaders to the letter, just like what happened to many of us. Our leader apparently dropped us like a hot potato because we questioned his leadership style. What could be the appropriate leadership style to use in situations like this? And as a leader, how should we handle situations like this?
Well, there has to be a rail guard in leadership. So, one of the dangers of leadership is when you don't get yourself accountable to somebody else, because you start to think that you're infallible and that, it's only your decision that counts, right? So, um, perhaps we can't do anything about your leader anymore, but we can do something about you because you're going to be a leader yourself. And remember, you need to put some safeguards, rail guards around you as a leader and make sure that you are accountable to somebody more senior to you, right? So that eventually nothing like this would happen.
Okay. One more question. Does brain dominance, right, or left brain, male, female brain really matter as far as leadership effectiveness is concerned?
All right. First of all, brain dominance, right brain, left brain, is a myth. There's no such thing as right brain being responsible for creativity and the left brain responsible for logic. It's a myth. All right. Before they thought, when we still based on psychology and observation, but basing it on neuroscience, creativity is actually the highest form of cognition because it involves all of your brain. And it's also not true that we are only using 10% of our brain because our brains are functioning 100% all the time. All right. However, the amount in which we produce out of that 100% usage will have to do with what we focus on because that will set the brain in motion. You get that? So in other words, even if you're focused on a negative emotion, your brain is still 100% in operation to make that negative emotion at work. That is why you need to be careful what to focus on in your life.
Wow. So whether or not you're focusing on positive or negative emotions, your brain is 100% on that. Wow. That's amazing.
You have to
Any
be
mental
able to
activity,
know what to
yeah,
focus
and
on.
any mental activity will always demand from the brain an interconnection from different regions. So it's not true that there's, a right brain or left brain.
The
It's
logic
a myth.
brain.
It's really a myth. It's not supported by science. And with regards to the men's brain and the women's brain, in terms of operation, apparently newer research would not point to any differences except the size. And by the way, the size of the brain has nothing to do with the intelligence of the person. Nothing to do at all.
Okay. So just curious, which brain is larger, the women's brain or the men's brain?
The man's brain is always
The
larger than
men's brain. Okay. I want to make a joke on that, but I'm going to get into trouble.
But let me insert. There's actually a
Okay.
research done by Harvard University about executives who are leading at the highest level in their organization, particularly as CEOs. All right. And they found out that in the new world of work, apparently, there are some behaviors that are in it to women leaders that are working better for subordinates in the marketplace, in the workplace.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I think it has nothing to do with the brain. It's more to do with stereotypes. Get that? It's more to do with culture and stereotypes because we tend to to create a stereotype of a leader who's like a hero, somebody so dominant and all of that, right? And that is how perhaps a lot of men actually think that that's the best way to lead people. Listening is more attributed to women, but apparently it's proving that being a good listener will also make you a better leader.
Rob, on that note, what would you say is the scenario in the Philippines in terms of women in leadership?
Women, well, let me relate that with studies on women and empowerment. We actually have one of the highest scores next to New Zealand in terms of women empowerment. Women in the Philippines are more empowered, right? Than
That's nice to
all the
know.
other, yeah, all the other nations. We're second to New Zealand on that. I think, and I think in the Philippines we also don't see a lot of discrimination in terms of,
Correct.
women occupying the same positions as men, but yet, for example, in the U.S., they actually earn a little bit less than men in the same position. So But I think here in the Philippines, we don't have much problem about that. It's just a matter of encouraging more women to take up more leadership roles. And perhaps one of the reasons why they don't take up leadership roles is because of priorities. Maybe they want to prioritize their families, or they want to prioritize nurturing their children, but it has nothing to do with their capability for leading.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. All
Oh,
right,
lalo tayo na-inspired. Okay, so
if I may add to that, in the organization, there's actually a shift from CEO to SHEEO. So yeah, and they observed that the countries that actually navigated the COVID crisis better are led by women, like Germany, New Zealand.
New Zealand, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yes. Interesting. Okay. There's a question here with regards to sales again. So with people who are leading people who actually have like main jobs and they have a side job. So with regards to those, how do you actually motivate them if they're already tired and they're not able to perform in their best level?
Wow. It's it's energy management. It will have to do with energy management. Then again, there are many ways in which you can increase your energy. One of them is actually choosing the right food, right? So that out of the metabolism, you create more energy, because there are a lot of foods that take up so much energy instead of adding energy to you. That's number one. And of course, maybe if you want to have more energy at the end of the day, then you have to be more physically fit. You have to sleep better and stuff like that. So I think it's not about doing all the wonders at work or shortcuts, or like, because you also, your organization is giving you a salary for supposedly a service you have to offer to the organization. So it will be unfair for the organization if they give you, if they pay you a certain amount of money and yet you're not working very well in that organization. I don't agree with that as well. So management has to be done at the personal level. So sleep better, right? Eat better and do some exercise and stuff like that.
So it's possible.
If you want to do more, then you've got to be good at all of these things, especially sleep. And because it doesn't necessarily follow that when you are awake all the time that you can be more productive. Remember, because lack of sleep in the first place can actually trigger a threat response in the brain. So if you work overtime on a certain assignment, let's say for the next 3 days without sleeping at all, you'd be surprised that on the second or the third day, nothing creative comes out of your mind anymore. If you stretch yourself too much.
Yeah. So sleep equals productivity because, we usually believe otherwise, less sleep, greater productivity. But yeah, studies have shown that it's actually not.
Or take naps as well. Studies have shown that with 20-minute nap, not more than that, you will have difficulty sleeping at night. 20-minute nap in the afternoon can actually reset, all right, your brain. Remember that the prefrontal cortex, which is the intelligent or smarter part of your brain, can only work at its peak for 4 hours. It will have to need about 20 minutes of a reset before it can go again.
Okay, wow, 20-minute naps. Wow. I'm really good at naps, Bambi.
Me too. I do it every lunch break. I make sure that I have my power nap. Okay, so here's another question. Are there any tips to avoid emotional hijack?
Emotional hijack?
Yeah.
Yes, it's called emotional regulation, because we are actually capable of regulating our emotions. For example, when when a stimuli is introduced to you, all right? So what happens is that, and it depends on the situation, okay? For example, if a snake is about to bite you and it's so close, you'd be surprised that your reflexes are activated to prevent the snake from biting you, right? That's actually one of the reasons why amygdala is very good at spotting some threats. And it's only for that reason that it works for you. But in terms of productivity, in terms of health, in terms of success, and in terms of growth, amygdala would not work very well for you. So, for example, when there is a particular problem or a particular stimulus that's, that is being presented to you, remember that you are not like animals. You can actually create the space in between the stimulus as well as your response. All right? Animals are different because when a stimulus is introduced, they cannot think about what response to take, right? And so they bite you when you try to hurt them. But you're a human. You are responsible of creating that space in between the stimulus and the response. And that space is called responsibility, your ability to choose your response no matter what the situation is. And that is supposed to work in terms of, and that is supposed, parang pinatayan ako ng ilaw sa studio ko. And that is supposed to work for humans, mature humans, whatever the situation is.
To choose how to respond. That's what's
Mhm.
important.
Yeah, we can actually choose. I remember you told us that there should be a gap from when we respond from the time when we feel the action, the emotion.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So Rob, true or false? Women are more emotional than men. And then there's a question here. She's a leader in a mostly women organization. And then what she found really hard was that the emotional responses of women to feedback. As an example, an employee has been delegated a task and had multiple opportunities to get knowledge about her task. However, mistakes still happened, but was given a lot of chances. When the person was dealt with much more stiffer responses, the employee felt abused and literally cried. How do I properly give feedback to these kinds of things when empathy seems to have been taken as everything is okay? No need to bother, and stiffer feedback seems to be meant as abuse.
Mhm. All right. Wow. What a complex situation. But let me answer the first one. And the first one says that are women typically more emotional than men? I would say it depends on the level of maturity. Second, it depends on what season the woman is in. For example, it's true that menstruation can actually cause certain hormones in the brain that could influence her erratic reactions. And it's also true that when a woman is pregnant, that can also, can do the same for her brain and all of that. So, um, but as a matter of character, like, is it really typical that women cannot control their emotions given a difficult situation like that? I don't think so.
So how would you, if you were the leader, how would you handle um such a situation?
Um, yeah. Well, when it is within the organizational context, the problem oftentimes is that there's a culture that feeds it. All right. And oftentimes the culture in the organization doesn't just happen doesn't just, flourish like that. It's always rooted on what is being tolerated by the founder or the top leader. Okay. So, in other words, perhaps it's already a practice in the organization. We don't really know because we don't know completely the entire situation here. Um, but I'm sure there are appropriate ways to actually handle that. Otherwise, you know, perhaps the reason why that person is still there is because the leader is still holding on to something
Hmm.
that she thinks would be redeemable in that case, right?
Mm,
So, yeah, it's really hard to give an advice when you don't know the entire context.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't
that's right. That's
give an
right.
exact answer for that.
So talking about emotions, here's another question. Is emotional intelligence part of neuroscience? Can you please elaborate the relationships?
Oh, yes, definitely. All right, so this is your brain, for example. The cortical region, yung mga kulot-kulot, that what you see outside of your brain, but that's not the entire brain. Inside your brain is actually the limbic system. This is the seat of your emotion, seat of your fear. Most of the time, your emotions are actually processed here, okay? And this is your brain stem, and whatever is being processed here, usually it flows through your brain stem. But also, there are a lot of functions in your body that doesn't need any, volition, or for example, digestion. You don't decide when to digest. You don't decide when to salivate, right? These are still functions of the brain, and they're automatic functions of the brain. You get this? So, however, all right, with regards to emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, right? Emotional quotient is actually not a function of the limbic system. In fact, it is a function of your cortical regions of the brain. Are we here? So, in other words, you can still feel how you're feeling. And perhaps because of your experiences and your exposure in life, you already have some presets in terms of how you should be responding emotionally. But it doesn't mean to say that you can be a victim of that forever, because that could change because you still have a region that is more powerful. Are we here? Now, the limbic system can actually be influenced by your memories, your experiences in your life. But the thing about the cortical regions of your brain is that it can function without, independent from your experiences, independent from your memory, independent from your trauma, and all of that. It is responsible for imagination. It can actually help you modify your behaviors today so that it could fit to the future that you want. A great coach is actually somebody who can activate the cortical region more, supposing by helping someone, imagine or realize her ideal self. Get that? Knowing exactly what his identity, or what the ideal self, or basically concept of a healthier concept of the identity of that person. That is actually based on studies. That's actually the beginning of that person pursuing a vision and unleashing his potential eventually, and getting all of these, everything that the person is actually prepared for that to be unleashed. Do you get that? So, and these things are very, very important. So emotions, not just thinking process, are all parts of the brain. Anything that has to do with the brain is all part of neuroscience, including emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
That was very informative.
Yes. Okay. There's a question here about, there's politica in the office. It's how it's been done for many, many years. As a leader, how do you actually work on that kind of mindset in your people?
Politica in the office, and that's how it's actually done. Well, as a leader, it really depends at what level you're leading the organization. So if you're leading the organization at the top level and you have decision over some culture, then well and good, you can be a great catalyst for the change in the culture, right? But if you are not in charge of changing the culture, it doesn't also limit you from changing the subculture within your team. So you can begin with that. All right. You can always begin with that.
Okay. Yeah. So there's still hope. Yeah. Even if you're not at the top.
Yes.
Yeah, Bambi, as a follow-up, I'll just ask this question. Is SCARF enough to create a paradigm shift in the organization? So curious lang daw, is that enough?
Well, actually, you can leverage on neuroscience, because a lot of leaders actually do not believe on just psychology. But when you start to show them evidence, biological underpinnings of certain principles in psychology, or to defy what has been a popular psychology already, and you can present evidence from neuroscience, that can be very convincing, and you can leverage on that. Not SCARF alone.
Okay, so here's another question. Communication is really the key in this social neuro leadership. I understand there is no one fit to all formula for leadership. How can I convince our leaders to move from traditional to collaborative leadership?
I think, Bambi, you can answer that because you're an HR personal. But get them. I do executive coaching. So if you want your leaders at the executive level to start embracing new ways of leading, then introduce me to them, right? Because that can perhaps make a change. I have a totally different approach to coaching. Some people are just coaching at the individual level. My approach in coaching is that I contextualize it with organizational performance. In other words, I look at the metrics that the organization is looking at to improve business, and also and all the stakeholders as well, including management, suppliers, customers, the community, and the environment as part of its stakeholders, and then eventually help the leaders to identify some bottlenecks in terms of their leadership or their leadership behavior, and we focus on that in terms of modifying those behaviors to become more effective, and it will have a ripple effect in the entire organization.
Okay, yeah. So contact Rob if you need executive coaching. Rob, do you have a question? Can you tell us about your day? Like, what do you prioritize so that your productivity is consistent and it's always at the top level?
Well, if you ask me about being productive consistently, I'm not productive consistently every day. I have a way of managing my brain resources. It's not all the time that I want to be at the peak state. There are times when I just want to lay on my bed and just think about, just let my brain travel anywhere. Perhaps my favorite is always to travel with God in the future and just imagine things together and just perhaps, try to find some inspiration there. I love it. I love doing it. I love dreaming of some possibilities, and that may not be productive in a sense to get that. So there's a particular study that says that when you say your best version of yourself can actually be a very limiting perception as well, because you cannot be at the best version of yourself all the time in all things. Like, I'm not in the best version of myself when it comes to direction, because I forget about where I just went. I hardly recall directions. I have difficulty driving. I have difficulty with a lot of stuff, but I don't have difficulty with give me some complex problems to solve. I don't have difficulties looking at it and looking at the details. So in other words, if you were going to ask me what a typical day would look like for me, well, I might not be very proud about it when I tell you all the details.
Okay, so don't tell us because
realistic. I'm not a Superman. I'm just as human as anybody else, right? Yeah. And I'm as weak as anybody else. Everything is, and I also fall. For example, in a day, I don't get to be very productive as well. But one thing I believe in, His mercies are new every morning. So at 12 o'clock midnight, God's mercies are new already. So even before I decided to use it, it's already available for me. So it gives me a fresh perspective about life and how to go about it, no matter what I missed in the past. Get that? So take it one day at a time. And that's it.
I agree, no? Parang feeling natin he's a Superman. He's an amazing Rob. Pero you know what? Pareho lang talaga. No? We have our own limitations as well.
Yeah, that's so comforting to hear, because I always joke with Rob and say, I want to be like you when I grow up. All the degrees, all the journals. Can you imagine, guys? He's read 70 journals in just a very short span of time. I can't even finish one. So yeah, it's nice to hear that Rob is, just a regular guy like all of us.
Yeah. I think I answered you with that by saying maybe I'm just used to reading it. It's not like, I'm the best at it, but I'm just used to reading it. So, and anything can be learned. So yeah, don't look at me with wow, Rob did this and Rob did that. And we all have our own journeys to take and we all have our own identities to enjoy and our own paths that are tailored by God for us. So I think the most important part there, which makes sense in neuroscience, everything else rotates around identity. Everything else rotates around your concept of who you are, and what comes after I am will definitely govern your future and your decision making. Remember when you were trying to find a course for yourself and you said, I am bad in math? What did you do? You were trying to look for a course that doesn't have as much math in it. Why? Because we are wired to actually follow a direction based on our identity. That's why be careful with what comes after your I am. And for me, what has been most empowering is that I am not Superman, definitely. And I'm 100 convinced about it after all that I've been through, weaknesses that I still have in my life, and failures I've had in my life. I'm not a Superman, but I'm a winner. Not because of myself, but because, and this may not sound very scientific to you, but for me it is, and I can prove that in another session. Somebody
Yeah.
died for me to make me whole, and that's
Yeah.
why I am here. And no matter how weak I am, no matter how fail at anything, I can always go back to the fact that not by myself, but in Him, I am whole, so that I can move forward every day without the pressure of trying to prove that I'm better or trying to get validation from others. I am whole as I am because of Him.
Very
Yeah.
inspiring, Rob.
Yes, agree. So Rob, would you like to tell us just a little bit of the work that you do now and the studies that you're working on, just so we can watch out for them in the future when
All
you
right.
start publishing?
Okay. So anyway, there's what I'm actually working on right now are actually those two things. Number one is applied neuroscience, particularly positive neuroscience, which is the neuroscience of human flourishing. So it deals with creativity, it deals with identity, it deals with all else that is about human flourishing. So we try to study that, those mechanisms in the brain that are contributing to that, so as to help people actually amplify their genius. And when I say that, I don't say that you don't like the prominent type of genius, but I also believe that everyone has a genius inside in him. And secondly, how to actually create mechanisms altogether as social beings so that we can create that collective genius altogether through collaboration, performance, agility, and stuff like that. And eventually use that to move forward in terms of creating innovative solutions. All right. So these are the things that I have been working on lately, because I'm doing 2 doctorate degrees right now, one on neuroscience and the other one is innovation leadership. And what else have I been doing? I've been doing a lot. I've been doing a lot of work in terms of helping out our government solve some complex problems as well, trying to influence policies in the government as well, look at some problems that have not been solved simply because people have not been paying attention to them or politicians have not been paying attention to them. And we're bringing in, we bring a good business case for them to start looking at them and its effect when we really address these problems. So these are some of the things that I have been doing. It's not just about study. It's really more about, when you know that you have given so much, you would also want to bring it out to the open, to make that contribution, especially when you know that you have not, I don't know if it's the right thing to say, especially if you know that you have not earned it
Mm.
and it has been given to you for free. You just want to give it away for free as well. And people might not understand that part of me, but that's who I am. And that's how I understand about how life should be, to feel richer and better and more meaningful, because life is short.
Yeah, very inspiring. Now you're
Very,
gonna get us
very
crying,
well
Rob.
said.
Um, Rob, there's just a question here about leadership being like a mushroom, coming and going, some leaders coming and going. What can you say about that? Why do you think there are leaders that appear and then the next day they're gone? So if I got the question right, what are the reasons behind, leaders suddenly disappearing? I don't want to say disappearing, but I think that's what the question is.
Maybe they're not yet ready. That's why they voluntarily disappear. And there should be a reason for that. I'm not a fortune teller to know. I can definitely predict why people leave, like, on a voluntary basis from their leadership positions. But yeah, and we might end up, trying to stereotype why people leave. And I don't want to go to that. I don't want to get there. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want to touch that because we might be judgmental about other people.
Yeah. So maybe on a positive side, why do leaders endure? If
Mm.
yeah.
Well, if you want a solid study on that, there's actually a study of leaders who led organizations for a long time. And not only that, their impact went more than 100 years in one organization, or even about 200 years. And the organization is still held intact. And this isn't a profit organizations, big corporations, and that's the good to great. And one thing they identified about leadership is what they call level 5 leadership. And level 5 leadership is a kind of leadership that is rooted in humility and with consideration for other people. And surprisingly, that's the kind of leader that held organizations together for like 100 years. Such a surprise.
Yeah. Not the typical, what we have in mind about leaders. Humility and what was the other thing? Humility.
Individualized consideration.
Consideration.
And there's another one that they added to it that has been part of the study of transformational leadership. It's leadership that's built on purpose, but they used another term for it in leadership theories. But yeah, definitely, that's purpose, sort of like purpose-driven type of leadership. And then the execution is very much rooted in humility, and then at the same time, individualized consideration for others.
You can just imagine, no, if we have that kind of leadership in an organization.
Yeah, and I understand there is always a leadership gap. If I may add to that, I'm part of Marshall Goldsmith and stakeholder-centered coaching, and in this, and we are the biggest executive coaching firm in the world, and our firm actually handles Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 500 executives under Marshall Goldsmith. And we have identified that there's definitely a gap in leadership. You know why? For example, people were, if you can, and there was an extensive study done about this in different industries and different fields and different, arena. And people were asked if they are satisfied with their leader. And you know what came out? What actually came out is that only about 20% of people are satisfied by their leader. And so they went further in their research, and they thought that maybe people would be more satisfied with a faith-based organization. But you know what came out? It was the level of satisfaction was so much lower than the ones in business, because the level of satisfaction was only at 8% compared to 20% in business, only 8% in faith-based organization. So in other words, there is really a gap in leadership. And if you come to think about that in your own life, perhaps you've only been through one or two leaders in your own life that has really inspired you to bring out your best, right? And perhaps most of your exposure about leadership could be people who might be heroic in terms of their attempts for themselves and attempts for success, but they were never leaders at all who allowed you to step on your shoulder so that you can see yourself bigger, right? This time when you are on the shoulder of the leader, more than you could ever see yourself by yourself. So, and I think that's a privilege of leadership, because a lot of people think that leadership is actually a position to, like, to brag about. But I don't think that's what leadership is about. It's not about authority. It's not about power. It's just a privilege. It's just a privilege to be taking care of somebody else's life. It's just a privilege to be allowed to be, it's just a privilege to be chosen, that your shoulders, that people can actually step on your shoulders so that they reach, so that they move higher in their calling in life. And if leaders can only understand that, then they would be more careful about being a leader.
Yeah, such a nice picture, Bambi. Leader giving their shoulders for people to step on, so that their people can actually elevate in their work, in their performance. So I think we're running out of time. So Rob, before we let you go, we just want to ask you to tell us or to just invite people again to the Mastery in Coaching course. It starts in October.
Everything that I've told you will try to make sense when you join me for this 8-week session and Mastery in Coaching to be a professional coach yourself that's internationally certified by International Coach Federation. It's going to be this October. There are 20 slots, I think, that the People's Academy is offering for a discount voucher of 42,000 pesos to be exact. All right. So if you want to get that slot, all right. So just what are they going to do? Are they going to email or whatever if they want to apply for that? So maybe who won?
Yes, we
You
have
know,
a
they-
link.
Yeah.
There's
a
a link. Yes.
In the chat box. Mhm.
All right. So there's a link in the chat box. Apply for that to get the discount voucher. And everything I talk about here will make sense. At least not everything. Yeah. Everything. Because everything I talk about here is actually applied to a conversational mastery. All right. So at least because we know that we can impact more people one conversation at a time through coaching. And more than that, it's actually a lot more in the package. And I think my students would know that when I do coaching, I don't stick with just the outline because, you know,
Correct.
I'd be actively involved in all the sessions. And I think my students can tell that I don't stick with the outline. I bring in as much as I can bring in. And even if the course is over, I just love empowering people and adding value to people. So, and I take people with me wherever at the same level that I grow, because I'm always a child. I'm always excited about, you know, things that I learn, and I share it with everybody. And more than that, this is, for me, MIC is really, Mastery in Coaching is really a cause, because I think it's about time that people start to fully understand and execute what true communication is, and to start closing the gap, the listening gap, that's most of the time not in common conversations, especially conversations with leaders and subordinates. So this one, definitely you can bring home a lot of value from this program, and I hope you join that program.
Yay.
Thank you,
Rob.
Rob.
Thank you so much, Rob, for everything that you've shared tonight. Busog na busog kami, Rob. So
Correct.
thank you again. Everyone, can you just give Rob a round of applause? Again, thank you so much, Rob. So
Thank you, Rob.
yes, we invite everyone again to the Mastery in Coaching course, and to again inspire you with their stories about how coaching has changed their lives. We just want to show the video again featuring Brian, Pearl, Dan, and Marge. Please watch this video.
Hi everyone, this is Brian Villarba, and I'm so glad to be part of Master in Coaching in the Philippines. And personally, my life was changed with coaching as well. When I had this rare opportunity to have a coaching session with Rob, you know what, after that conversation, I discovered the inner strength of myself, and I developed new perspective in life. And enrolling into this course, I learned that coaching is a conversational dance wherein it can really help to someone's life, especially if they're struggling or if they are experiencing dilemmas in their life. Coaching can really help. And right now, I'm so excited to share the experience to other people and give impact to their life as well.
Hi, this is Dan. Okay, so I'm going to share a short testimony of how the process has been for me. Honestly, this was not something that I would see myself doing, so it's a whole new ball game for me, and I'm glad that I got into it. First, it has been a process of learning and unlearning, of humility and dedication, and just the full knowledge of knowing yourself, and not just yourself but other people as well, is the cherry on the cake for this one. And secondly, now you understand, or I understand more, why God has given us specific skill sets and capabilities and attributes, is because one day He is going to make you use them, and definitely it's for His greater glory. So overall, it's been fun and exciting. And again, thank you for having me in the class, and thank you to everybody that I have, worked with. And I hope I get to see everybody soon and work with everybody the soonest.
Hi, I'm Pearl. I was part of the Master in Coaching cohort that completed the course in April. Master in Coaching helped me understand what coaching really is, especially in the industry I'm in. I can now identify which role I am playing, and my coaches appreciate the value of professional coaching and how it can add value to them. It's no longer a typical conversation, but a conversation with a deeper value and meaning. It totally took my coaching to the next level.
Hello everyone, this is Marge. I am from Davao City and I am a social worker by profession. Currently, I am connected with the Department of Social Welfare and Development under the Pantawi Pamilyang Pilipino program. I enrolled in Coaching Changes Lives in October 2020 and was able to graduate last April 2021. Being part of this program for the past 6 months has truly made a huge impact on my life. It increased my self-confidence, honed my leadership capacity, and challenged my pursuit for self and team development through constant learning. It was a risk in terms of how my time and finances would permit me in order to sustain in this journey. But here I am, recently pronounced as one of the professional coaches certified under the International Coaching Federation based in Singapore. I understand how huge my responsibility is as the program head of the largest poverty reduction program of the government in our region. And being part of this coaching program has truly helped me, and most of all, being able to understand and appreciate what empathy is made me become a better person and a leader. Social work always equates to service, but being in this program made me realize
So thank you, everyone. I hope you're all inspired to enroll in the Mastery in Coaching course this October. Bambi, next week, we have an exciting activity next week.
Yes, thanks everyone. Again, before we finally end, friends, please don't forget to log in by May 24, 2021. That's gonna be Monday next week. And it's our final night and it's going to be different. Your newly certified coaching professionals of the People's Academy, and that's me, Clarice, Jen, and Mike will be your resource speakers who will talk about coaching people in difficult situations. Please don't miss this final session. And don't forget, if you post anything on Facebook about our event, use hashtags the People's Academy, Future Fit Leader, and of course, we also wanted to invite you to join our FB page, the People's Academy, for more updates. By the way, we will not be providing recordings in any of the session. See you next week, everyone. Same time, same link, and have a good night.
Good night.